The HOA cut my 100-year-old oak tree in half while I was at my father's funeral, and their plan backfired so badly that now it's the most photographed spot in the county. I'm talking about a tree my great-grandfather planted with his own hands in 1923. 4 generations of family moments happened under its branches. The day I was laying my father to rest, the HOA president decided it was the perfect time to chainsaw it down the middle like she was splitting firewood. That evening, I pulled into my driveway, drained and heartbroken, and there she was. Madeline Harrow, standing next to what was left of my family's legacy, wearing a satisfied smirk and holding a clipboard stacked with emergency work orders. The tree looked surreal, half standing, half gone, like someone had attacked it with a sword. Here's the thing about destroying something beautiful out of spite. Sometimes it only shows the world how ugly you really are. What would you do if you came home to find your century-old family tree destroyed while you were grieving? Let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I'm Samuel Redding, 49 years old, an electrician, and the 3rd generation to live in the same house my grandmother bought back when this was still cotton fields and good intentions. It's a 1947 Craftsman with wide porches, built-ins, and morning light that filters through century-old oak leaves onto my kitchen table. The whole place smells like sawdust and strong coffee. Scents that sink into your soul after 75 years. That oak tree outside my window, my great-grandfather planted it in 1923, right after returning from the trenches in Belgium, said he. Needed something beautiful to look at after seeing too much ugly. Every milestone in my life happened under those branches, my first steps. Graduation photos, my wedding picture back when I still believed in forever. When my dad got sick, he sat under that tree every morning with his coffee, watching the sunrise. 2 months of watching cancer eat away at the strongest man I knew. Weeks before his diagnosis, my wife filed for divorce. That house and that tree weren't just property anymore. They were my last connection to everything that mattered. But then came the developers. 15 years ago, they swept in like locusts in suits, turning farmland into Maplewood Estates. Nothing says classy suburb like naming it after the trees you cut down to build it. They threw up. McMansions around my grandmother's home, then decided we all needed an HOA to protect property values. My house got grandfathered in with voluntary compliance. Just like saying a root canal is voluntary if you enjoy screaming. Enter Madeline Harrow. She moved here 6 years ago from Oregon, immediately ran for HOA president, and took to the role like she was campaigning for world dictator. Real estate agent, naturally, lives in the biggest house on the cul-de-sac, minus 4,800 square feet of beige perfection. Right down to the Harvard-worthy doormat, the sound of her manicured nails clicking against her clipboard became the neighborhood's unofficial warning siren. It started small. Letters on HOA letterhead telling me my grass was a 1/4 inch too tall. My mailbox was the wrong shade of black, apparently. There's a difference between midnight and obsidian that only people with too much time and too little purpose can spot. Then she came for my work truck, citing a buried no commercial vehicles clause, but her true obsession was my oak tree. She claimed 2 inches of my branches crossed into my neighbor's airspace. Like she was negotiating international borders. I'd had it professionally trimmed just 6 months earlier. But she measured it herself with a tape measure and the dedication of a crime scene investigator. She took photos from 17 angles like she was building a legal case against it. On the morning of my dad's funeral, I left before sunrise for the service, 2 hours away. I gave my spare key to Mrs. Eunice Park, my 79-year-old neighbor who knows more about the goings-on here than the NCAA. The funeral was exactly what you'd expect, a stranger reading generic words while my brother and I stood in stiff suits. That smelled of mothballs, trying not to break. By the time I got home, the desert sun was painting everything gold. My tires crunched on the gravel, sounding too loud in the evening quiet, and then I saw it. My oak tree. 4 generations of history, chainsawed in half like some twisted art project. Not removed, not pruned, just split in 2. Christine stood there in her perfect blazer, directing a cleanup crew with her tablet, The smell of fresh sawdust and diesel exhaust lingered in the air like evidence of a crime. She waved an emergency work order at me, claiming the tree was an imminent danger to the neighborhood. 3 neighbors had called in safety concerns, she said, but when I demanded proof, she hid behind privacy laws. Still, she couldn't resist bragging. She'd documented everything, time-stamped photos, millimeter measurements, contractor quotes. She'd turned tree destruction into a forensic investigation. This tree was professionally trimmed 6 months ago, I told her, pulling out my phone to show the arborist's certification. Licensed, bonded, the works. She laughed, not a polite chuckle, but a gravelly, full-throated cackle. That's adorable, Derek. Sue us. The HOA's legal fund could buy your little house twice over. But here's the twist. While Christine gloated, neighbors started taking pictures, and not just for gossip. The half-tree was blowing up on social media. Some people loved it. It's calling it accidental suburban art, or something Salvador Dali might have dreamed up. And apparently, Instagram loved it too. I spent that night buried in HOA law until my eyes felt like sandpaper. My dad had been a union electrician. He always said the only tool management can't take from you is knowledge. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered reading that HOA emergency powers aren't as urgent as certain wannabe dictators like to pretend. There are rules, things like notification requirements, proper procedures, and documentation timelines. Digging deeper through legal websites, I found it. HOA emergency powers require 72 hours. Written notice for any work that isn't truly life-threatening. The only exception is if someone's literally about to die in the next 10 minutes. A tree that survived the Great Depression doesn't magically become deadly on the day of my dad's funeral. The next morning, I called the HOA's lawyer. Voicemail called again. Voicemail, apparently. Emergency doesn't extend to returning calls from the people you're steamrolling. That's when Mrs. Eunice Park shuffled over with news that made my coffee. Tastes like Christmas morning, she'd seen pristine. Measuring my tree at 7 a.m. on the day of the funeral, 3 hours before any emergency work order even existed, and 7 hours before the chainsaws began their death song, she had that little tape measure out like she was planning a bank robbery. Mrs. Eunice Park told me in that special tone elderly Korean women reserve for calling someone premium-grade foolish. Took pictures from every angle. That woman planned this whole thing like D-Day. But here's where it got good. Mrs. Eunice Park has security cameras, professional ones. The kind that capture every detail in crystal clarity because she got tired of porch pirates stealing her arthritis meds. And those cameras caught pristine, red-handed, measuring and photographing my tree hours before filing any paperwork. Emergency? My wrinkled behind, Mrs. Eunice Park muttered, pressing a USB drive into my palm like it was solid gold. Girls about as urgent as a scheduled root canal. The footage was perfect. Time stamp. 7:03 a.m. Pristine, measuring my tree with the precision of a crime scene investigator. Emergency work order filing time, 2:17 p.m. Chainsaws starting, 11:30. .m. You don't need a law degree to see the problem. You can't file emergency paperwork after you've already started the so-called emergency. Meanwhile, the sound of car doors slamming became our neighborhood's new soundtrack. As curious visitors came to see our accidental art installation, professional photographers showed up with cameras worth more than my truck. Coffee shops started advertising half-tree lattes and surreal Sunday specials. A local paper even ran a human interest story about accidental suburban art. Pristine doubled down harder than a Vegas gambler. She told anyone with a microphone that the tree's sudden fame proved it was a dangerous distraction and a liability nightmare. In her twisted logic, people wanting to photograph something beautiful meant it needed to be destroyed. Completely, but she miscalculated. The internet has a long memory and zero patience for petty tyrants. Soon, every HOA horror story in the county was being shared alongside photos of my tree. People swapped their own pristine encounters. The family she harassed for parking their wheelchair van in their own driveway. The veteran she cited for flying an American flag supposedly 2 inches too large. That evening, I sat beneath what was left of my family's oak, watching the sunset bleed through its wounded branches, and I realized something important. Pristine thought she was teaching me a lesson about compliance. Dead. She'd given me a master class in how bullies expose themselves when they think no one's watching. Game on. 3 days later, my mailbox coughed up a gift. Legal papers. Thick enough to choke a horse. The HOA's attorney had crafted a cease and desist letter that read like a declaration of war, printed on expensive ivory paper, full of threats about harassment and defamation of character. Character defamation. From a woman who cuts down memorial trees during funerals. The irony could have powered the whole neighborhood for a week. But Pristine wasn't finished playing dress-up lawyer. She'd compiled a greatest hits list of my supposed violations. My work truck. A commercial vehicle in a residential zone. My mailbox still the wrong shade of black. Apparently, a weekend garage projects, now excessive noise, disturbing the peace. Each came with escalating daily fines, because nothing says community leadership, like nickel-and-diming your neighbors into submission. Here's where her master plan hit a pothole the size of Texas. My butchered tree had become a real tourist attraction. Not just neighborhood famous county-famous tour buses began pulling up. The local visitors bureau even listed it on their quirky Arizona attractions website. Right between the world's largest ball of barbed wire and a diner shaped like a cactus. The smell of diesel exhaust from idling buses mixed with desert heat and sunscreen until it became part of the neighborhood. Mrs. Peterson started charging tourists $5 to use her bathroom and was making more than most people's. Side hustles. The Henderson kids ran a lemonade stand that could have funded a small country. Even the grumpy teenagers next door were selling overpriced bottled water to photographers with more money than sense. That's when Pristine made her next move, calling code enforcement to report my unauthorized commercial venture. Never. Mind that I wasn't charging anyone, or that I had zero control over who showed up with a camera. In Pristine's universe, logic is optional. Mr. Holbrook, the code enforcement officer said, clipboard in hand, one suspiciously similar. To Pristine's favorite prop, you need to discourage visitors or face commercial zoning violations. I was about to argue when Mrs. Eunice Park appeared again like a tiny Korean fairy godmother, with news that changed everything. She'd been doing her own detective work. What she found was priceless. Pristine's brother-in-law owned the landscaping company that butchered my tree. $3,200 for half a day's work, Mrs. Eunice Park announced, waving printed financial records like she'd just uncovered buried treasure. No competitive bids, no board approval. Just Pristine writing fat checks to family. That evening, I went back to researching HOA financial regulations, because insomnia mixed with righteous anger makes for a great study session. And that's when I found it. Any emergency expenditure over $500 requires board approval and competitive bidding. Always. No exceptions. Even for real emergencies. I called Jake Morrison first thing the next morning. He'd already heard about the tree incident through his network of legal gossip. Apparently, cutting down a heritage tree during someone's funeral creates quite a stir in attorney circles, he said, his voice dripping with dry amusement. Then Jake asked. She paid her brother-in-law $3,200 without board approval. I could practically hear him grinning through the phone. That's not just a rule violation, that's possible embezzlement. While I was busy gathering evidence, Pristine went on the attack. She launched a full-blown smear campaign against me. Anonymous complaints about my electrical work started showing up at my job sites like weeds after a storm. Safety inspections suddenly appeared every time I posted an update about the tree situation and the rumors. Oh, those spread like wildfire, whispering that I was unstable since my father's death. Using grief as an excuse to harass innocent board members, it was psychological warfare, death by 1,000 paper cuts. Neighbors who once waved now avoided eye contact. Mrs. Rodriguez, who brought casseroles during Dad's illness, suddenly discovered urgent gardening projects every time I appeared. Then came the notes. Cheap dollar store paper. Block. Letters like a third grader's handwriting. Drop the lawsuit, or things get worse. Trees aren't the only things that get cut down. Smart people know when to quit. I found them under my windshield wipers, shoved through my mail slot, even taped to my front door. The paper was rough, scratchy, the kind that leaves a paper cut if you're not careful. Whoever was writing them was either reckless or desperate. But Pristine's masterpiece came when Channel 7 decided to run an investigative segment. Hey, HOA overreach. When tree trimming goes too far, she couldn't resist the spotlight, agreeing to an on-camera interview in her best power. Blazer, wearing a concerned citizen expression. She'd clearly practiced in the mirror. The reporter asked about the timing. Why emergency powers were suddenly needed on the exact day of my father's funeral. Her answer? A bureaucratic masterpiece about unfortunate coincidences and safety priorities, superseding personal scheduling conflicts. She had just called my father's funeral a scheduling conflict on live television that night. Watching the replay online, I realized she had just handed me the smoking gun. Because there's one thing bullies can't survive, having their cruelty broadcast to thousands of people. They'll know the difference between emergency safety work and petty revenge. The comment section lit up like the 4th of July, and none of it was on her side. The very next morning, she called an emergency HOA board meeting. Not the usual 3-person gathering to argue about garbage can placement. This was a full-scale. Official notice, big show meeting, the topic. Declaring my tree an ongoing public nuisance and authorizing its removal. The community center. Where it was held looked like a monument to giving up on life. Beige walls. Flickering fluorescent lights, squeaky folding chairs, and the faint smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with disappointment. Pristine came prepared. She brought a landscaper to testify that the remaining half of my tree was structurally compromised and could fall without warning. She had property value charts, traffic statistics, even a petition with 37 signatures. Never mind that my certified arborist had already declared the tree completely sound. Her guy wore a tie and had PowerPoint slides, so naturally, some people thought he was more credible. But I had been busy too. That very morning, went to the county courthouse and pulled the original property deed from 1947. Sometimes the best weapon against modern bureaucracy. It's older bureaucracy and jackpot. It contained an environmental protection, its clause requiring the preservation of significant mature trees. Not just any trees, specifically my oak. The original surveyor had marked it as a heritage specimen, estimated to be over 100 years old, to be preserved in perpetuity. In legal terms, forever. Jake drove down from Phoenix for the meeting. Armed with copies of the deed and a stack of legal precedents, he looked like the kind of lawyer who actually read the books on his shelf, the kind who could make opposing counsel sweat with nothing but a politely worded motion. The room filled like it was fight night. Pristine supporters sat up front, mostly newcomers sold on her property values pitch. My side. Longtime residents, people who remembered when this was farmland, and even tourists who'd driven in after seeing the news coverage. Mrs. Eunice Park sat in the front row, holding a thick folder documenting every violation, every shady transaction, every abuse of power Pristine had committed since taking office. She'd turned HOA accountability into an art form. Pristine began her presentation like a prosecutor, complete with dramatic gestures, toward enlarged photos of tourists taking selfies under my tree. This has become a circus, she declared. Children can't play safely, property values are suffering, and something must be done. That's when Jake stood up, pulled the property deed from his briefcase like a magician revealing the ace of spades. This tree is protected under the original environmental covenant for this property, he said. Removing it would require city permits, environmental impact studies, and approval from the Historical Preservation Committee. The room went silent. You could hear the lights buzzing overhead. Pristine's face shifted through more colors than a chameleon in crisis. And Jake? He wasn't done yet. The emergency tree removal had been done without a single permit, a direct violation of city ordinances and state environmental protection laws. The contractor who carried it out could now be facing criminal charges for destroying protected plant life. Pristine's landscaper suddenly found his shoes incredibly fascinating. The contractor himself sat 3 rows back, looking like he'd rather swim with sharks than be in that room. But Jake wasn't done. The HOA had also broken its own financial rules, awarding a no-bid contract worth $3,200 to a board members. relative, without the proper approval. That wasn't just a minor rule break. Under state law, it could be seen as embezzlement. The silence in the room stretched on until someone in the back began slow clapping. Another person joined in. Within half a minute, half the room was applauding while Pristine sat there, frozen. It's like she'd just been hit by a freight train full of legal documents in that moment. Realized we'd gone from playing defense to launching a full-scale offensive. She had walked into this meeting thinking she was orchestrating my downfall. But all she'd done was hand us the rope to tie her own noose. The vote was postponed indefinitely. 3 board members slipped out during a 15-minute recess to hand in their resignations. And Pristine, she just sat in that folding chair, staring at the deed that had destroyed her master plan. Finally realizing what checkmate looks like, the real breakthrough came 3 days later. Jake's legal team had finished digging through the HOAs. Financial records and what they uncovered made the tree incident look like a parking ticket compared to grand theft. "Derek," Jake said over the phone, his voice carrying that particular excitement lawyers get when they smell blood in the water, "you need to sit down for this. That tree wasn't random revenge. It was a desperate cover-up. It turned out the original 1987 neighborhood development agreement contained an environmental protection clause, one that made my property nearly untouchable. Any significant tree over 50 years old was protected by county ordinance, which required environmental studies and city permits before removal. And the oak tree they destroyed? It had been specifically named in the surveyor's report as a heritage specimen requiring perpetual preservation. Perpetual as in forever. As in even God himself would need permits from 3 agencies to touch it. But here's the kicker. Pristine had known. The HOA's insurance company had flagged this environmental liability months earlier during their policy review. Protected flora could lead to criminal charges and fines of up to $50,000. She wasn't enforcing HOA rules. She was trying to destroy the evidence before the insurance audit uncovered her mess and the financial trail. Even uglier. Jake's forensic accountant found years of no-bid contracts, $47,000. Worth, all paid to businesses owned by Pristine's relatives, her brother-in-law's landscaping service, her cousin's fence repair company, and even a consulting firm run by her unemployed nephew that existed only on paper. She hadn't just been on a power trip, she'd been embezzling HOA funds. And the upcoming audit threatened to expose the whole operation. Destroying my tree wasn't personal. It was criminal. It was her attempt to eliminate a piece of physical proof that could unravel her scheme. Mrs. Eunice Park, one of the neighbors, handed us the last puzzle piece, security footage of Pristine. I'd meeting with the landscaping crew 2 weeks before my dad's funeral. Not talking about an emergency removal, but planning it and paying cash under the table. With no HOA paperwork, by the time the insurance company's audit flagged the financial irregularities, Pristine's real estate license was already under review for conflicts of interest. Her husband had quietly filed for divorce, likely trying to shield his assets from the legal hurricane heading her way. It all clicked. The petty harassment, the fake rules, the sudden emergency. None of it was about grass height or mailbox colors. It was about forcing me out before I discovered my property's legal protections. She wasn't a neighborhood tyrant. She was a desperate criminal who'd been caught in the act. "How much trouble is she in?" I asked. Jake's laugh could have powered a small city. Criminal charges for embezzlement, fraud, destruction of protected property, false emergency reports. Oh. Civil penalties for restoration costs, punitive damages, and legal fees. She's going to lose her real estate license, and her husband's divorce lawyers will strip whatever's left. If she'd just left that tree alone, none of this would have happened. Sometimes karma doesn't just tap you on the shoulder. It shows up with a dump truck and runs you over twice. Jake's office smelled. It's like leather law books and coffee worth more per pound than most people's car payments. We spread out documents across his conference table like generals preparing for battle. 3-pronged attack, Jake said. Criminal charges, civil lawsuit, and HOA governance reform. We'll hit her from every possible angle until there's nowhere left to hide. The DA's office had already opened an investigation after seeing the evidence of fake contracts, fraud, and property destruction. But the civil suit was where she'd really feel it. Damages for the tree, emotional distress for timing it. During my father's funeral and legal fees, climbing faster than a rocket, we were estimating $75,000, and that was before adding pain and suffering. The beauty is, Jake explained, her insurance company will hang her out to dry. Embezzlement voids coverage. They'll pay us just to make this go away. Meanwhile, Mrs. Eunice Park had become our intelligence director, armed with years of meticulous records of every HOA rule Pristine had broken. Every email, every meeting. Note, every financial move. It's perfectly organized in color-coded folders. She approved 18 no-bid contracts, Mrs. Eunice Park reported. Total value, $47,300. All to family. All without board approval. We didn't just have a case. We had a hammer, and Pristine had just handed us the nails. The Historical Society brought in expert testimony proving the tree's importance. Backed by documents dating all the way to 1923, they uncovered old newspaper articles about my great-grandfather's return from Belgium. Original property surveys showing when the tree was planted, and even aerial photographs from the 1940s proving it stood long before any house in the neighborhood. In just 2 weeks, I learned more about property law than most people do in a lifetime. Emergency powers require written documentation within 24 hours, but Christine filed hers 3 days late. Environmental protection laws override any HOA rules. No exceptions. And with insurance subrogation, my insurance company became my unlikely ally. Chasing reimbursement from the people responsible for the destruction, the most satisfying moment was watching Pristine's support network collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. 3 board members resigned to avoid possible criminal charges. Her landscaping expert lawyered up and began cooperating with investigators. Even her own brother-in-law claimed she misled him about the legality of cutting down the tree. My insurance company was relentless, launching their own investigation into the false emergency claim. Their forensic accountant tracked every suspicious transaction, every rule violation, every abuse of authority. When insurers smell fraud, they go for the kill, more aggressive than sharks in a feeding frenzy. The story was gaining momentum. The local paper was planning an investigative series on HOA accountability. Channel 7 prepared a follow-up report on the criminal charges. Even a documentary filmmaker from Phoenix called about turning this mess into a film on suburban corruption. Took a public speaking course at the community college. If I was going to testify in court, I wanted to sound like I knew my stuff. I learned how to stay calm under tough questioning, how to present evidence clearly, and how to make complicated legal concepts easy for regular people to understand. The hardest part wasn't the law, it was the personal side. Going through decades of family photos to prove the tree's significance brought back a flood of memories. Pictures of my dad as a kid climbing those branches, my wedding photos under its canopy. For generations celebrating birthdays, graduations, and reunions in its shade, timing was everything. We lined up the criminal referral with the civil lawsuit filing and coordinated with the media to break the story at the same time the city council was set to vote on making the oak a heritage tree. Would be a perfect storm of legal and public pressure, one Pristine wouldn't escape. Jake, my attorney, had contingency plans for every outcome. If criminal charges fell through, we had other legal strategies. If the civil case stalled, we had backup moves. If Pristine tried to run, we had measures to freeze her assets. But the best part of the plan was simple. Let her destroy herself. Every rash move created more evidence. Every lie was recorded. Every threat added to the charges. Jake summed it up with a grin as he packed his briefcase. The thing about people like this, they always think they're smarter than they are. She'll dig herself so deep, she'll come out in China. When the financial records became public, Pristine's first move was to hire Kellerman Banks and Associates, the kind of firm that charges more per hour than most people make in a week. Their Phoenix office had marble floors so polished you could perform surgery on them, and receptionists who looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion catalog. Her legal strategy? Challenge everything. The heritage tree designation, the financial audit, even my property deed. If you can't win with facts, bury the other side in paperwork and expenses. It was pure scorched earth tactics from someone who'd rather burn down the whole neighborhood and admit she was wrong. But expensive lawyers don't look good when you're already under investigation for embezzlement. To prosecutors, it screams, "I've got hidden money and I'm not cooperating." The district attorney wasted no time upgrading her case to a felony investigation. That's when the harassment started. Anonymous flyers showed up on windshields, accusing me of exploiting my father's death and tanking property values with frivolous lawsuits. The paper was cheap. The printing smelled faintly of desperation. Then came bogus code enforcement calls, complaints about tall grass, an illegally parked work truck, and unpermitted electrical work. Each one brought an inspection. Each one cleared me completely. But all wasted my time. Things escalated when I found all 4 tires on my work truck slashed in a Home Depot parking lot. Brand new Michelins, cut with precision. Oddly enough, my security cameras malfunctioned during the exact 20-minute window it happened. Thankfully, my neighbor, Mrs. Eunice Park's cameras caught someone in dark clothing prowling my yard. At 3 a.m., carrying what looked like landscaping tools. Same night, someone tried to finish what Pristine started by cutting down what was left of my oak. They only made a few cuts before backing off, probably realizing tampering with Federer. Protected evidence isn't the smartest move. Police narrowed the suspects to 3 people, all related to Pristine. Her PR campaign crashed even harder than her legal one. She gave a tearful TV interview claiming she was the victim of a grief-stricken man out for revenge. Might have fooled some people, but the act was so rehearsed it bordered on parody. And here's the thing about investigative reporters. Once they catch a scent, they dig until they find the truth. Channel 7's follow-up report exposed Christine's long-running pattern of targeting homeowners who dared to question her authority. 3 families had already sold their homes and moved away rather than endured her relentless harassment. 2 elderly residents were slapped with violations that didn't even exist in the HOA handbook. The local newspaper's legal columnist wrote a blistering editorial about corruption in HOA boards, using Pristine as the poster child for everything wrong with suburban governance. When appointed officials believe they're above the law, the article concluded, homeowners become prisoners in their own neighborhoods. My insurance company's investigation covered a gold mine. Years of fraudulent claims linked to Pristine's family businesses, fake storm damage, exaggerated vandalism reports, even a suspicious theft of landscaping equipment that magically reappeared a week after the insurance payout cleared. Then the FBI, real federal agents with badges, not just local officials, showed up at Pristine's house one Thursday morning with search warrants for her financial records. Turns out, using HOA funds to pay fake contractors can count as mail fraud if the payments move through the postal system. And federal charges? They carry much longer sentences than state ones, and federal prosecutors aren't exactly generous. When it comes to deals, that evening, I sat beneath my wounded oak tree, watching the sunset turn the desert sky into a canvas of gold and orange. In the distance, Pristine's perfectly polished world was collapsing like a house of cards in a sandstorm. Her high-priced attorneys were about to discover the nightmare of defending a client who kept committing new crimes in the middle of an ongoing investigation. She'd started this thinking she was swatting a fly. Instead, she'd poked a bear, one ready to remind her why bears sit at the top of the food chain, and why flies tend to live longer than people who threaten their eye. Cub's daughter's next move was so desperate, it would have been funny if it hadn't been so pathetic. She called an emergency meeting to declare the HOA bankrupt and dissolve the board, hoping to transfer all assets to a shell company before investigators could seize them. The plan had the subtlety of a toddler hiding cookies by eating. Then the notice went out Friday for a Monday morning meeting, technically legal, but clearly designed to keep attendance low. She scheduled it for 7 a.m. at the community center, counting on most people being at work or busy getting their kids ready for school. Classic power play. Change the rules when no one's watching. But word spreads fast in a neighborhood where someone's been running crimes with a chainsaw. By Sunday night, social media was buzzing with details. Mrs. Eunice Park had organized a phone tree more efficient than the Pentagon's comes. System Monday morning came with the kind of heat that makes asphalt soft and tempers short. The parking lot looked like a political rally cars, trucks, and 3 news vans, with satellite dishes pointing toward the sky like mechanical sunflowers. Inside, Pristine sat at the head table looking like she'd aged a decade in just 2 weeks. Her signature blazer was wrinkled, her hair showed gray roots, and her hands trembled as she sorted through papers that likely contained more fiction than the local library. Due to mounting legal costs and frivolous lawsuits, she began. Her voice strained. The board has no choice but to declare bankruptcy and dissolve this HOA. The reaction was instant. Shouts of "Show us the books" echoed off the walls. Pristine banged her gavel so hard you'd think she was driving railroad spikes. The air smelled of too many people crammed into too small a space, a mix of nervous sweat and industrial disinfectant that barely masked the building's musty odor. Then Jake stood from the back row, briefcase in hand, wearing the kind of grin that makes defense lawyers reach for antacids. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. Before this board takes any action, I have some documents everyone might want to see. Walked forward with deliberate steps, the confidence of someone holding every winning card. Mrs. Cartwright, you're served. The papers landed on the table with a heavy thud that silenced the room. Criminal charges for embezzlement, fraud, destruction of protected property, a civil lawsuit seeking over $75,000 in damages, and a federal investigation into mail fraud and racketeering. Pristine's face shifted through colors like a time lapse. Sunset, white, red, green, then back to white, as if someone was working her complexion with a remote control. Jake wasn't done. Any attempt to dissolve this HOA or transfer assets while under federal investigation is obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence. I've already filed injunctions to prevent it. In the back of the room, 2 FBI agents who'd been quietly observing suddenly drew everyone's attention. They'd been documenting her bankruptcy stunt in real time, adding witness tampering and obstruction as charges to her list of felonies. The best moment came when Detective Rodriguez from the Sheriff's Department stepped forward, handcuffs gleaming. Under the fluorescent lights, Madeline Harrow, he announced. You are under arrest for embezzlement of public funds, filing false emergency reports, and destruction of protected environmental resources. The click of those cuffs was sweeter than church bells on Christmas morning. Pristine's carefully crafted image shattered as she was let out, her high-priced lawyers scrambling. Behind her, like confused puppies chasing a fire truck, the room erupted into applause that went on for a full minute. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. Somewhere in the crowd, Mrs. Eunice Park was high-fiving neighbors half her age, while clutching a folder stuffed with evidence that had helped take down a local tyrant. The remaining board members, what was left of them, voted unanimously to cooperate with investigators and implement full financial transparency. The bankruptcy motion died faster than a vampire at sunrise, and emergency audits were scheduled for the following week. Outside, reporters swarmed like bees on spilled honey. The questions came fast. How did it feel to see justice served? What happened to the tree? Is this about HOA overreach or something bigger? I let Jake handle the legal questions. But when one reporter asked what I had learned from it all, gave the answer that made headlines for weeks, I learned that bullies only thrive when good people stay quiet. The moment you shine a light on people like this, they scatter just like roaches when the kitchen light flips on. That evening, I sat under what was left of my tree, beer in hand, watching karma put on a masterclass in consequences. And I realized something. This wasn't just about saving my family's heritage. It was about proving that ordinary people can fight corruption in Andwinaven when the system feels rigged against them. Sometimes, David doesn't just beat Goliath. He gets him arrested for tax evasion, too. The city council hearing was set for Wednesday evening. By 5 p.m., the place was packed tighter than a sardine can at a fish convention. Media crews had transformed the chambers into something that looked like a TV studio, lights blazing, cameras rolling, cables everywhere. The air was thick, with that electric mix of nerves and anticipation, like the sky before a summer storm. Pristine sat in the front row, wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed so badly with her skin tone it could have been its own crime. County jail clearly didn't offer wardrobe consultations. She'd been released on bail that morning just in time to watch her empire crumble in front of half the county and 3 different news stations. The Historical Society went first, armed with enough documentation to impress the Smithsonian. Photos from 1925, property surveys proving the tree's protected status, even soil samples showing its age and ecological importance. Their presenter, a retired professor who could have stepped right out of a history book, spoke with the kind of authority that makes politicians shift uncomfortably in their seats. "This oak tree isn't just botanical heritage," he said, pointing to a blown-up photo of my great-grandfather planting the sapling. "It's a living piece of this region's history. Destroying it is like vandalizing a natural monument." Next came a certified arborist, explaining how the surviving half of the tree could not only live, but thrive with the right care. His PowerPoint looked like a medical recovery plan: timelines, restoration techniques, projected growth charts. It was like the tree was a patient fighting back after an attack. Then, the district attorney's rep dropped the bombshell that made Pristine's face go paler than fresh snow. She was now facing 6 felony charges, including embezzlement, environmental destruction, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Federal investigators had even uncovered years of mail fraud and tax evasion. The room went so quiet you could hear the UHR. Cameras zooming. Even Pristine's hyperist attorney looked like he'd rather be stranded on Mars during a dust storm. And then, Councilwoman Martinez turned to Pristine. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" That's when the meltdown happened. "This is a witch hunt." Pristine shouted, her voice cracking. "That tree was dangerous. I was protecting this community." She ranted about conspiracy theories involving the media, insurance companies, and the federal government. Apparently, everyone was out to get her because she understood property values better than the rest of us. Security guards moved closer as she started pointing at random audience members, calling them paid agitators and outsiders. The irony of a recent organ transplant calling lifelong Arizona residents outsiders was lost on her but not on the crowd. I stood up. The room went silent again, cameras swiveling toward me. "Double quotes, Mrs. Cartwright," began, my voice carrying across the chamber. "You cut down my family's 100-year-old tree while I was burying my father. You stole money from neighbors who trusted you. You filed false emergency reports and threatened anyone who dared question you. This was never about property values. It was about power and what happens when small people get a little of it. Forget they're still accountable to the community they serve." The silence afterward was heavy. Then, a single clap broke it, followed by another, and another, until the whole chamber was on its feet. The council's vote was unanimous. Heritage tree designation approved. A protective buffer zone created, and a small memorial park to be built around its base. The city attorney made it crystal clear criminal charges would move forward, no matter what shape the HOA's finances were in. And before any plea deal could even be considered, full restitution would be required outside the courthouse. Reporters swarmed me like I'd just solved a decades-old mystery or discovered a cure for something big. The questions flew fast. How? Does it feel to win? What's next for the tree? Any advice for homeowners fighting HOA corruption? My answer became the headline on every evening broadcast. This was never about winning or losing. It was about proving that in this country. Your neighbor can't erase your family's history just because they don't like the color of your mailbox. Sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when the fight feels impossible. 6 months later, my half-tree had become the most famous landmark in 3 counties, complete with historical markers and a small volunteer-run gift shop, where every penny went toward tree preservation programs. The irony was delicious. Pristine's mission to erase my family's legacy had transformed it into a living symbol of resilience. Drawing thousands of visitors and pumping over $50,000 a year into local businesses, the legal fallout was exactly what Jake had promised, and then some. Pristine pled guilty to avoid a nationally televised trial, earning herself 18 months in federal prison plus full restitution. Her real estate license? Gone forever. Her husband finalized their divorce with extreme prejudice, and she was permanently banned from serving on any HOA board, assuming she could ever afford to live in an HOA neighborhood again after paying back $67,000 in stolen funds and legal fees. Meanwhile, the HOA itself was reborn. New board members campaigned on transparency and accountability. The bylaws were rewritten to require competitive bidding for anything over $500 and homeowner approval. For all emergency actions, the fear that once ruled the neighborhood was replaced with open debate, laughter, and actual community spirit. Now meetings focused on playground upgrades instead of mailbox colors. My own life took a turn I didn't see coming. Sarah Olivia, Mrs. Eunice Park's granddaughter and volunteer coordinator for the Historical Society, became a regular at my kitchen table. Together, we planned the first Heritage Tree Festival over coffee, trading family stories about legacies worth defending. She had her grandmother's wit, her grandfather's stubbornness, and a smile that somehow made even bad coffee taste good. The tree's recovery became a teaching project for the local college horticulture program. Students studied its restoration, learning firsthand about resilience and renewal. New growth transformed the damaged trunk into a canopy, unlike anything nature had intended, uniquely shaped, yet more beautiful for having survived. Local schools brought classes to see it, using the story to teach history, environmental stewardship, and the power of standing up to bullies. Kids who had never heard of HOAs learned a bigger truth. Sometimes, the right fight is the hard one. The ripple effects spread far beyond our block. Jake used our precedent to win 3 more cases across the state, shielding thousands from petty HOA power trips. The state legislature even passed HOA reform laws requiring financial transparency and curbing emergency powers. Thanks to Pristine's spectacular meltdown, business boomed for me. Sure, but what mattered more was what I got back. Purpose. Speaking at conferences about homeowner rights became a calling. I helped others fight their own Goliaths, without losing their sanity in the process. The Heritage Tree Festival grew into an annual celebration of everything Pristine had tried to destroy: community pride, personal freedom, and the belief that everyday people can stand up to corruption and win. Musicians played beneath the tree's twisted canopy. Artists displayed works inspired by its story. Families picnicked where generations before had done the same. 4 generations of my family now have photos with that tree, not as a symbol of loss, but of victory. Dad would have appreciated the irony, his funeral sparking a battle that saved his grandfather's tree and exposed a fraud I'd been stealing from our neighbors for years. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is letting bullies undo themselves. While you quietly gather the evidence, the final numbers tell the story: total recovery, including damages $87,000, economic boost from heritage tourism, over $200,000. HOA reform laws passed using our case as precedent. Sure are states. Similar cases successfully resolved. It's 27 and counting, but the most important number is still just one. One family tree saved for generations to come. Proof that sometimes David doesn't just beat Goliath, he gets him arrested, convicted, and sent to federal prison. Got your own HOA horror story? Drop it in the comments. Let's help each other stand against suburban tyranny. And if you enjoyed watching justice catch up to the bullies, hit that like button, subscribe. Stick around, because next week's story involves a crooked mayor, a parking meter scam, and the most outrageous public records request you've ever heard of, from all of us here at HOA Stories. Thanks for watching today's HOA Karen Meltdown. See you next time.